Hello guys, good evening. You're welcome to this NEET PG Live Daily. I'm on this portal for after some time because I had engagement with other channels like Plus and special classes. So today I will be discussing about drugs that affects the renal function, especially the urine output or sodium excretion, and that fall under the category of diuretic and antidiuretic drugs. These drugs are very important class of drugs and are used in most of the cardiovascular conditions, and that is why I thought of taking a class on this. And the topic is little lengthy. That is why I have decided to cover it in two parts. Let's begin with the topic. But for those who have come up on this platform NEET PG, Unacademy NEET PG live on this YouTube channel. For those, I would like to introduce myself that I am Dr. Pramod Sharma and I'm a clinical pharmacologist. This is a super specialty and that I have done from PGI Chandigarh. And guys, you should be part of this group which is available on Telegram app. This is a kind of messenger app. You all know that as we use WhatsApp, this is similar to that. And here we have lot many members, especially these students like you, those who are interested in getting prior information about all the classes and all that. And this is the group where we educators share our timetable, that is at what time I will be available and what I will be taking in that particular day, and the topic and the subject. So you have schedule of the day beforehand in your so that you can plan your activities for the day, and you can watch sessions which you like most, and obviously any topic or any educator, that depends on you. But if you have this information well in advance, that will always help you in aligning your activities as per the need. So don't forget to download this if you have not downloaded yet. So what you are waiting for, just download it and install it on your system. Guys, if you are not aware of this fact, many of you must be aware, but some of you may not be knowing this, that there is another opportunity to enjoy free classes, that is in the form of special classes. This is special classes you can watch only on the platform which is offered by Unacademy, and that is in the form of this app, Unacademy Learning App. This learning app is available for both Android operating system as well as the iOS operating system, and the type of smart device you have, you can always choose and download it, install it on your system. The difference you will note in special class is that interface is entirely different, and that will give you a better feel, because this special classes you have also opportunity to interact with educator. You can also raise your query, and if time permits and if number are limited, then that can be easily taken up during the class itself. So this is a kind of interaction, a positive, healthy communication between the learners and the educator. So this would definitely give you a more opportunity to understand the subject, and opportunity to ask your doubts, etc. during the class. So don't wait, just download it. And if you know your friends, those who do not have this facility or this services, you can also let them know, and they will also download it, so that everybody can take advantage of or benefit of this free classes. But some students, many doctors, they want something which or they consider that the free classes alone are not sufficient. They need something extra, which they feel can make her or his chances of qualifying the postgraduate entrance examination little higher. So they are in search of something which can offer everything at one platform, that is one-stop solution for all his or her needs. So for them, Unacademy has come up with this NEET PG Plus channel, that is paid service that is subscription based, though the more than 80% of the content of the or the classes of the all the classes in fact are available free of cost on the one or other channel on YouTube or this Unacademy learning app, but this plus has something more to offer. Not live classes. Live classes are everywhere same, but the plus has different services to offer to its learners in the form of that I will be showing you a slide of how it differs from other services. So, and this is available better on paid basis, and it is not free, but the fee that is being charged for the getting the subscription is not a hefty amount. Rather, it is within the reach of most of the people, and can easily be affordable, and afforded by you can easily afford it and can go for the subscription to get the extra what you are not getting attending this free classes. So that will be a value addition to your kind of learning you are getting from Unacademy platform. So this subscription is available for 12 months and 4 months period. There are the two choices this thing, and you can see the amount that is being charged for 12 months is 22,500. But if you apply this referral code for my using my name Dr. Pramod, you will get 10% discount at this fee, and that then roughly comes to 20,000. So it's justifiable. It's a notional amount if you consider and you can extend the subscription, or you can buy subscription for 24 months by adding little extra, that is around 25,000 after the discount. So it's up to you, but I would suggest that these two offers are these two duration 24 months is always better, but at least 12 months is required, because the syllabus of MBBS is quite lengthy and quite voluminous. So you need at least 12 months to prepare yourself to cover all the subjects and all that, and during this period why we are suggesting at least 12 months, because you will be able to contact or come in contact with all the educators from different speciality, and also you will be exposed to various courses that are being hosted on this particular channel, that's NEET PG Plus. So it would be better for you to have at least association with this particular services for at least 12 months, so that you can better prepare yourself or better learn and that would definitely enhance your probability of getting into or getting through the PG entrance examination and all that. It's not it's after all your hard work. One cannot assure anybody that it will be a definite it will be a service which will get you a definite seat in the PG entrance examination. That is not there. That claim nobody can make, but definitely your probability would definitely increase if you get associated with this, and as well as you work hard towards achieving your goal. So don't forget to apply this code if you want to get 10% discount, and payment can be made through any mode as per your convenience. And why this plus is considered as kind of premium service, because premium service always comes at a cost, because here you have live classes like now you are attending, but you cannot interact with me, because the interaction between the educator and learner is not there on a YouTube channel, though you can send messages and all that, but it's not possible to interact with you guys. But when you attend this Unacademy learning app special classes, you have opportunity to interact with learners, so that makes a little better platform than the YouTube. And but here in NEET PG Plus, these live classes are little unique in the sense that First of all, because the number of learners are less on NEET PG Plus, so the educator has more time to interact with or more frequently can interact with learners, and any doubt, any queries, any question that can be asked by the learner, and they can interrupt the educator because the number are less. So that would always be a beneficial for the learners, because unless there is a healthy communication or exchange of information or between the educator and learners, I don't think that any learning process will be effective. So this is a kind of real time interaction between the learners and the educator. So this makes this learning process little better than available on or being offered by any other platform like YouTube or so. And because the number of the learners are less, so educator has a kind of can give personalized attention and can focus on each and every learner, and better aware of the weaknesses and strength of each and every learner. So in that case, the educator will be able to address the issues with each and every learner who is lacking in some areas. So that is also a win-win situation for the learner. And there is facilities for facilities like live posts and leaderboard there, those are there, which you can make use of, and this is good for you as well as for we as an educator, because we also get a feedback about the content or the the style of teaching and all that, and we also come to know about your performance. You also know your performance, and and where do you stand among your peers and all that. So this is important. You can take up test series and their analysis and all. So this is another facility that is available on only NEET PG Plus, because it is a paid service, and moreover, as per the mandate of the NEET PG Plus, we all have to have a doubt clearing session once we complete 3 sessions on consecutively on the plus NEET PG Plus. If I have I'm conducting any course on that NEET PG Plus, if I have taken 3 sessions, in the 4th session I have a dedicated doubt clearing session, so that learners can clear their doubts or refine their concepts and all. However, they are all always welcome during the live class itself. They can interrupt the educator and can ask whatever they feel like. Any question or any doubt, so that is also there, but this is purposefully kept. If somebody comes to know about new thing or find something which he later realized that he's not able to understand or all that, or some new information becomes available to him, or he wants to clarify those things, so this session is definitely going to help those learners. And very good thing is the offline access to all the contents available on on this NEET PG Plus, because it is available 24/7 and 365 days, which at many platforms you are not able to download and all that, but here you have everything in your hand with one click. So this is one-stop solution for all your needs. So I would definitely recommend you guys to be on the board of this NEET PG Plus. And subscribe to it, and the fee that is being charged is nominal. I don't think that it is a definite it's a hefty amount, but it's affordable, should be affordable by all of you, I suppose, but it is your call whether you want to come on this platform or not. I just can can suggest you and can make a recommendation that you should definitely come and join this NEET PG Plus to get maximum benefit out of this learning platform that is the India's #1 learning platform. So with this, let us start the topic proper, that is diuretics. So I will be discussing today diuretics. And in this first part of the topic, let me start with some introductory statements. First of all, what is a diuretic? If you define diuretic, many people say diuretic is a drug which increases urine volume. Somebody say no, the drug which increases sodium excretion. But if you technically, if you define diuretics are drug that not only increase urine volume, but they increase sodium plus accompanying chloride clearance as well. So all the three things, all three excretion or elimination is enhanced by a diuretic in true sense, the drug which has been actually assigned a status of diuretic. Then comes another term called natriuretic. As the name itself suggests, natriuretic, these drugs cause natriuresis, means they enhance clearance of sodium in the urine. Natriuretic. So these are called natriuretic because the elimination of sodium in comparison to the water excreted through urinary route is always more. But any natriuretic cannot act just by eliminating sodium, because the sodium will always take along with it the water also. That is called obligatory water loss. So they also have uretic action, means diuretic action. So they can be named as diuretic because they are removing sodium as well as water along with it. Third term is aquaretic. Aquaretic is a substance that increases excretion of solute free water, means they are only increasing water loss and no electrolyte losses. And in true sense, aquaretics can increase water. For example, these ADH antagonists, they can increase water loss through the kidney without increasing the solute loss. But there could be some solute loss, some, at least if you not much, some solute loss, because the urine flow increases through the nephron. So many a time, some of the losses of electrolytes can happen because the time required for their reabsorption, all that is curtailed because of this increased urine flow or massive urine flow. So because of that, there may be indirectly loss of some electrolyte. But aquaretic, if you compare, the losses of water is much more than the electrolyte loss. So we can consider it as that increases excretion of solute free water. So osmotic diuretics and ADH antagonists have been kept under the category of aquaretics, but it's not they are not simply or purely aquaretics. There is loss of some electrolytes also. But I said in science there is nothing is all or none kind of thing. There is some overlapping. And for the diuretic to exert their diuretic action, the most important electrolytes are sodium chloride and bicarbonate, and their presence is most important for diuretic actions. Right? So this is a small introduction, but will definitely clear your doubts about different terms, how they are differing from each other. I will tell you how these osmotic diuretics are not simply aquaretics. It can have or they can have action on electrolyte losses as well. If you look at the classification of the diuretics, diuretics have been classified based on their efficacy. Many of them have, or there may be another method, the site on which they act. Right? And not only that, this also they have, if you name them, their mechanism action, like they can act by different mechanism. How do they act? That can also be used as a mode of classification. But in this, actually, this is the most commonly used classification, and that diuretics can be classified either as loop diuretic because they act on loop of Henle. So these are usually considered as high efficacy diuretics. Efficacy, meaning of the efficacy, Efficacy means the maximum effect a drug can produce. Suppose this is the maximum effect, that is 100%. No matter whatever dose you are using, but that should be well within the recommended clinical range. But this is the maximum effect that a drug can produce, irrespective of the doses. And potency is the amount of drug required to produce a particular level of effect. So it does not matter if you are actually looking for more important, this efficacy becomes more important, or efficacy of a drug becomes more important in selection of the treatment. A patient is having severe edema or very severe edema. If we use low efficacy diuretics, we know that this will not be able to clear that extra water that has been accumulated in the body. We need to have a drug which has capabilities or efficacy, that much efficacy that can clear that extra fluid. So potency is not a matter here, because even if you are using a potent drug, a small amount is being used, but it is not able to show that much effect which a high efficacy drug can show. So this loop diuretics are considered as high efficacy diuretics. Other than thiazide compounds, thiazide or thiazide-like compounds, they are chemically known as thiazide diuretics. So they act not on loop of Henle, but they act on cortical dilating segment or early distal tubule. So they actually are considered as medium efficacy diuretics, means they always have less efficacious than loop diuretics, but they are more potent. They have in comparison to usually they are more potent. Their smaller dose is required to produce diuretic effect. But if you talk about the higher means overall diuretic effect, that is more with loop diuretics. They have higher efficacy. This potassium sparing diuretics are named because they have tendency to prevent potassium loss. These two group of drugs actually promote potassium loss. That you will come to know how it happens. I will discuss everything. So these drugs can reduce potassium loss, or otherwise they have very weak diuretic action, because the area where they act, they have cannot lead to extra sodium loss, because of the sodium delivered at these sites where these drugs are acting is much less. So these drugs are usually act as weak diuretics, but they are not used alone for their weak diuretic effect. Rather, they are used as adjuvant with these drugs, so that can supplement their activity as well as can reduce the side effect produced by them. So this is a very rational FDC, you can say, rational fixed dose combination. This kind of combination is always desirable, reducing side effects at the same time increasing efficacy also. And osmotic diuretics, they simply act by promote urine flow by their osmotic action. They just retain water in the tubular lumen because of their osmotic forces, and leads to that loss of water through the kidney. This carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, these drugs, though they act in different site where actually carbonic anhydrase activity is quite evident, but this has been classified as their target of action, like carbonic anhydrase inhibitor there. So we have drugs acetazolamide, which is in clinical use, but methazolamide, ethoxyzolamide, these are also the compound which are capable of producing acting as systemic carbonic anhydrase inhibitor diuretic. So this is the overall classification. And loop diuretics, if you say, the most important drugs are furosemide, torsemide, bumetanide. These are all sulfur compounds, but ethacrynic acid is an organomercurial compound. And this endacrinone, I don't think it is available for, or maybe in some countries it is available, but this is a little unique in the sense that usually diuretics actually increase serum uric acid level, but this drug actually decrease serum uric acid. It facilitate or prevent reabsorption of uric acid. So this drug actually facilitate urinary excretion, uric acid excretion. And among thiazide diuretics, we have chlorothiazide, hydrochlorothiazide, very commonly used agent, hydrochlorothiazide, benzthiazide, clopamide, chlorthalidone, Clothianide is very long acting, and indapamide. Metolazone can be considered as a thiazide-like diuretic. Thiazide-like diuretic. I was talking about thiazide or thiazide-like diuretic. There is little difference in their chemical structure. Other than that, we have zipamide also available in some countries. This zipamide also is thiazide-like diuretics. They have some additional advantage, as has been claimed by some studies, but still the question mark is there whether that claims are really supported with adequate and because these claims have been contested by many. And potassium sporing derivative, we have Myloride, and these are mineralocorticoid antagonist, spironolactone and neperolinone, and these are sodium channel blockers. I will talk about each and everything. You just listen carefully and please pay attention to the class. This is how a diuretic can act. There could be different mechanisms, cellular mechanism I am talking about, which is the target where exactly actually these drugs act. So diuretic can act by different mechanism, different mode of actions are there. So some of them can act on specific membrane transport proteins. If you remember, when I discussed about pharmacodynamics, the several classes on pharmacodynamics, what are the different targets of drug action? So we had receptors, ion channels, enzymes, and transports. These are usually, but other than that, drug can act by different their physical or chemical characteristics also. And there are molecular antibodies that act by neutralizing antibodies, and there could be simply chemical antagonism or physical antagonism kind of thing. So these are the common targets through which a drug acts. So this is the example of transport proteins. So these diuretics, I will talk about one transport is this NKCC2. This is sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transporter. Same, it is also known as NK2Cl. And this is another NCC. Here actually the loop diuretic act on this transport protein, and this sodium and chloride co-transport, that is the target of thiazide diuretic. Osmotic effects. Some diuretic acts by simply their presence in the urine, and they draw because of the tonicity they impart on the urinary fluid. They can act by osmotic action, increases the osmolarity of the tubular fluid and prevent reabsorption of the water, and that can lead to water loss in the through the urine. By inhibiting enzymes, as I was just talking about carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, so this acetazolamide and all that. So there are different way of interfering with the receptors. So hormone receptors, especially these mineralocorticoid receptors, which is acted upon by that mineralocorticoid, that is aldosterone, the most important mineralocorticoid in the body, the natural mineralocorticoid. Let us first discuss the first group or first class of these diuretics, which are quite often used in cardiovascular conditions, especially in the heart failure or edema because of maybe of the hepatic origin, or maybe of the renal origin because of the renal failure, or maybe because of congestive heart failure and all that. These loop diuretics include many agents. I will be discussing about them. They are highly efficacious compound, and you can see they can produce urine up to 10 liter of urine can be produced. This much efficacy they have. So you can imagine that every day how much edema can be cleared off by these drugs, how much accumulated fluid can be cleared by these drugs. So these drugs have very rapid effect and can mobilize edema fluid within days, or within hours in fact. And this is possible because they act at the site where actually almost 25% of the total filtered load of sodium is delivered. So if these drug will prevent absorption of this particular load of the sodium, you can very well imagine how much obligatory water loss will be there. That is why they are capable of achieving the urine volume up to 10 liter a day. These drugs, as I said, are highly efficacious and they show dose dependent increase in response. As the dose increases, response also increases, and they have dose response curve little, they have steep dose response curve, means they have this kind of dose response curve, whereas the thiazides have flat dose response curve. So their action is rapid rise, and their efficacy is also high. So these drugs is different from medium efficacy, that is thiazide diuretics, that they have rapid effect as well as higher effect in terms of diuretic efficacy, and they have good relationship with the increase in doses, and in relation to that there is increase in response as well, diuretic response. The efficacy is much higher. That is why they are even active in patient of renal failure, that the patient having even creatinine clearance less than 30 ml per minute. This is claimed by certain studies, and it is said that thiazide diuretics, you should have creatinine clearance more than this, then only they will be little effective. But I was going through some literature, and it has been claimed that these claims are actually basis for these claims are from some small studies done in the past, which were not that this notion is being carried forward since then, but this is not this has been contested by many scientists, that this is not the actually correct fact. And but as far as I know, that the books always mention that these class of drugs can be used in patient of renal failure, but although the doses required will be little higher, because they can produce some effect even in patient who have this renal failure also, because of their high efficacy. So if you know the structure of the neuron, so these actually the site of the nephron, if we consider that it is the thick ascending loop of Henle, where actually this loop diuretic acts. That's why they are known as loop diuretic. But you should know which part of the loop diuretic, because we have thin descending limb, thin ascending limb, thick ascending limb, also this so one should know. And in this area, actually thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, there is transporter. I was talking about that they can act, the diuretics have different target of action, especially the transport and all that. So this co-transport is the target for this particular group of diuretics, that is loop diuretics. There they inhibit this sodium, potassium and 2-chloride co-transport. So this transport activity is totally inhibited by in presence of this loop diuretics, and sodium absorption cannot happen, and that can lead to the water loss along with the sodium and chloride. So the first agent in this class of drug is furosemide, very commonly known because we know it by name of Lasix also. And this is also good. This Lasix means it works for almost 6 hours, 3 to 6 hours its duration of action. So that is the way you can remember its duration of action. This furosemide has very rapid onset of action after administration, and you can expect its action. If you give it IV, within 2 to 5 minutes it shows its action, and if you give it IM, suppose it takes 10 to 20 milligram, 10 to 20 minutes, and even if you give orally as well, it can produce effect in 20 to 40 minutes. But there should not be, provided there is no obstruction in the oral absorption, or there is no or any condition which will affect its absorption, then it is absorbed even in 20 to 40 minutes. It can show its action, and its duration of action varies from 3 to 6 hours. And one important thing you should know that this loop diuretics always act from the luminal side of the tubular membrane. You know, tubular membrane, tubule are like this. There are cells, tubular cells at this is lumen, and this is interstitial space. So this is called basolateral side, basolateral. This is lumen. So it is not that, and here you have blood supply and all that. It is not that they come from this side and just act on the cells. No, they are actually first through the blood secreted in the lumen of the tubule, and from tubular side then they bind with the their target on the tubular cells. So this is possible because these drugs are secreted by anionic transporter that are present in the middle part of the straight segment of the proximal tubule. Straight segment, one is proximal convoluted tubules, that is zigzag kind of thing, and then you find straight part. Straight part has been divided into three parts. So middle one third is called straight, middle one third portion of the proximal tubule, which is called S2 segment, also is having this anionic transporter, and this transport many other things also. If you remember, these transporters are important in secreting these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the uric acid, the penicillin like antibiotics, and also these diuretics. So if that is why I said if patient with even renal failure can respond, because some of the activities, even if some of it this diuretic is secreted by this transporter, that will be able to act on the can promote sodium and water excretion, because they have high efficacy even if little bit of it is secreted. So that is why they are capable of acting in renal failure also. So moreover, this transporters, and you can also they are a cationic transporter which actually secrete bases, choline, etc. So that is present in the middle part as well as in the S1 part also, early part of this straight segment of the proximal tubule. So furosemide acts rapidly and they act from the luminal side. They don't act through the interstitial side. They are first secreted in the lumen of the tubule and then they bind to their target from the luminal side. What happens when IV injection of furosemide is given? It actually leads to sudden increase in the renal blood flow. Transiently, renal blood flow is increased, and this is because of some redistribution of the blood flow from the outer to mid cortical zone. Actually, there is redistribution. There is no actual increase in the blood flow, but there is redistribution. That redistribution you will also read in when I will talk about angina pectoris and all that, how beta blockers leads to redistribution of the blood flow. So this redistribution of blood flow occurs, and that without altering the GFR and all that, and the net result is there in fact is result in decreased proximal tubular reabsorption. It can affect reduction in the proximal tubular reabsorption also, and this is all mediated through prostaglandin generation, because this many of the action of these loop diuretics are mediated through prostaglandin that are synthesized intrarenally, because these loop diuretics can induce production of a kind of COX-2 enzyme in the renal tissues. So this is how it can decrease PT reabsorption. Proximal tubular reabsorption also have effect there as well. But when we use this furosemide on one's daily basis, suppose it does not have sustained action, what happens, this compensatory phenomena come into play. The reason being it is short acting. Find and if you use it once daily, once its diuretic action gets over, the compensatory phenomenon, whatever sodium or water loss could be achieved through the use of furosemide, are usually again made up through these compensatory phenomenon, because this diuretic action will lead to depletion of body sodium and body fluid volume. So that will actually activate, renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So that will start that will produce angiotensin 2, and and that will reduce GFR also, and there will be, because of the aldosterone, there will be enhanced action of the enhanced reabsorption of the sodium. So that will all lead to again that will compensate for the losses that has been induced by furosemide. So once daily dose will not have sustained action, because I said the shorter action, because of the shorter duration of action. So one should be careful not to give once daily if you want to achieve sustained effect and sustained mobilization of the edema fluid and all that. There should not be any drug free period. It should be available, the drug should be available to act, and so that these compensatory phenomenon do not come into play and replenish the losses that has been achieved with the use of diuretics. IV injection of this diuretics, especially the furosemide, can be used in acute left ventricular failure or pulmonary edema, and they provide relief. And that is probably because of when we give IV injection, the action is very quick, and that is there is instant increase in systemic venous capacitance. So veins get dilated, and that leads to fall in left ventricular filling pressure. So because of this left ventricular failure, what was happening, that because of the back pressure, pulmonary edema was developing. So now the less of the left ventricular filling pressure reduces, because of the capacitance increases, venous capacitance increases. So the blood coming back to the right ventricle is also decreased, and that is being delivered to the left ventricle is also decreased. So that pulmonary that induce afford quick relief in the symptoms due to pulmonary edema, dyspnea and all that. And this is because of all this release of prostaglandins, renal prostaglandins, and this peripheral vasodilatory effect is because of that. And it becomes apparent before any saliuretic action becomes visible or evident. Saliuretic means leading to loss of sodium and all that. So this is vasodilatory effect which can afford relief in left ventricular failure and pulmonary edema. So very important drug in acute LVF. Otherwise, it is used in certain cases of edema, peripheral edema, hypertension crisis, because it has brisk response and rapid response. So hypertension crisis, raised ICT, raised intracranial tension, and also in hyperkalemia and hypermagnesemia, because these loop diuretics actually promote losses of promote loss of potassium and magnesium in the urine. So the patient with hyperkalemia and hypermagnesemia, those who are on advanced cardiac life support, can be achieved with use of furosemide. This I will tell you how this can lead to hypokalemia and hypermagnesemia use of these drugs. And moreover, in acute renal failure, as I said, the higher doses may be used, because the kidney, the number of nephrons first of all are limited that are acting, and this process of secretion so that these drugs can reach to their site of action can also be compromised. So we need higher doses, but we can definitely achieve clinically significant action in patient with renal failure. And oligouric state, usually one should be very carefully using in oligouric state, and one should try increasing the blood flow to the urine if it is not possible with this this loop diuretic and all that. One can try after giving a test dose of the mannitol or osmotic diuretics. this is how actually this I was talking about ki once you give a dose of single dose of furosemide, actually because of the compensatory phenomenon, this the losses are actually compensated by this compensatory phenomenon, that is activation of renin angiotensin aldosterone system, and effect is not sustained. So this is possible because what happens, these diuretics induce losses of sodium that leads to a sodium deficit in the body, and there is something called juxtaglomerular apparatus. This is consisting of the macula densa. These are the specialized cells in the distal convoluted tubules, actually where thick ascending loop of Henle get merged with distal convoluted tubules. There we have some specific specific cells that are in the lining of the distal convoluted tubules. These cells are called these are granular cells, not granular cells. These cells actually derived from modification of different type of cells, and that sense sodium load in the tubular fluid, all that. So these cells actually sense the sodium load and all that, and get stimulated. If they are stimulated, then they lead to activation of these granular cells, which are the storehouse for renin. And this renin is released, that is converted into leads to conversion of angiotensin to angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2, and also release of aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. So this kind of, and these all three cells, these mesangial cells, and these renin containing cells, and these cells are called juxtaglomerular apparatus. So this macula densa is the area in the distal convoluted tubule. Because of this, there is a thickness of distal tubule which is in contact with the afferent arteriole and efferent arteriole of the glomeruli. So these cells, when because of the loss of sodium by diuretics like furosemide single dose suppose, so there is sodium deficit, so less of sodium is being delivered to the kidney because body wants to retain as much as sodium is there. So these cells can can sense that if there is less of sodium, so that less of sodium, then that it will lead to give a signal to these cells, granular cells, to release renin, and these renin can lead to as I said, angiotensin 2 production and increased sodium aldosterone production, that will lead to increased sodium reabsorption, all that. So that all these are called compensatory phenomenon. They can make up the losses induced by this single dose of furosemide. That is why you should have a consistent and continuous action of the diuretic to achieve best effect or to mobilize the edema fluid. It should not be intermittent based use. Bumetanide is another agent that is related to furosemide, but it is almost 40 times more potent than furosemide. It is not related to furosemide, it is in the same group, but it is also a sulfa moiety containing compound. And the advantage of this bumetanide is where furosemide is not effective, this can be effective because it is more potent also, you can see, and or where there is furosemide allergy, it can be used. Furosemide, if allergy is there where furosemide cannot be used, bumetanide can be used. So this is the advantage that bumetanide has over furosemide, and it is usually preferred for oral use in severe CHF, because in severe CHF there is hepatic congestion, GIT, gastrointestinal congestion. So the oral absorption of furosemide is not very much affected. So viability is very poor in severe CHF, but this bumetanide, because it has very highly potent, it has sufficient bioavailability to exert its effects, or can lead to mobilization of edema fluid or other symptoms of severe CHF. So this is can be used in or preferred over furosemide in this condition. So it is used in edema, as I said. Usually dose we use is 0.5 to 2 milligram, and in this furosemide we start with 40 milligram. So you can see that it is very potent, and it has sufficient duration of action. It can be used orally, once daily basis, and usually dose is 0.5 to 2 milligram. You can increase the dose if in every 4 to 5 hours if sufficient response is not received, and at two occasion you can repeat the dose at but the total dose in a day should not be more than 10 milligram per day. But usually initial dose is 0.5 to 2 milligram, but you can increase after 4 to 5 hours, a gap of 4 to 5 hours, and 2 times, and maximum dose should not exceed 10 milligram. It is also used in hypertension, but that is off-label use of the bumetanide. Torsemide is another compound which is used in congestive heart failure, chronic renal failure, hepatic cirrhosis, the edema related to all the 3 conditions. So this is effective in edema, peripheral edema caused by these clinical conditions, and it has been approved for use in hypertension. In all these conditions, the doses are different actually. In CHF and CRF, to mobilize edema fluid, you can start with 10 to 20 milligram orally, and can go up to 200 milligram per day. Maximum you can go up to 200 milligram. This torsemide can be used on once daily basis because it is 3 times more potent, as well as it is a little longer. It has a half-life of around longer than furosemide, around 8 hours. So it can be used on once daily basis. So here the maximum dose you can go up to 200 milligram per day in CHF and CRF. But hepatic cirrhosis, edema associated with hepatic cirrhosis, you can start with 5 to 10 milligram and can go up to maximum 45 milligram per day, not more than that. And in hypertension, you start with 2.5 to 5 milligram, and depending upon the clinical response, you can maximum go to 10 milligram per day. These are the limits: starting dose, limit, starting dose, limit, starting dose, and this maximum limit. So torsemide is 3 times more potent than furosemide, and as I said, these are the doses, maximum daily dosages in different clinical conditions. Many of the action, as I said, that loop diuretics were induced by expression of production of prostaglandins and all that. So this loop diuretic induces the expression of specific form of COX-2, that is inducible form, and that peripheral vasodilatory action or increase in venous capacitance is due to all release of renal PG that I have already discussed. And one important thing is that usually in thick ascending loop of Henle, the arginine vasopressin also actually help in sodium reabsorption. Sodium reabsorption through this sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter, and that is because of the increase in cyclic AMP. But many type of, especially the PGE2, which is synthesized in the kidney, that can that is actually through EP3 receptors linked to GI proteins and can reduce cyclic AMP level. So thus, by causing decrease in cyclic AMP level, it can antagonize the action of ABP that was actually increasing the cyclic AMP. So it helps in blunting the sodium absorption also. Sodium reabsorption. So this decreases sodium reabsorption also. So this way it can actually, these prostaglandins can have additive effect with loop diuretics, additive action. So these renal prostaglandins that are synthesized by induced by this loop diuretics help in many situations, and also they have additive action on the diuretic efficacy of these drugs. And not only that, because of this reduction in cyclic AMP, they can also reduce or interfere with the AVP action in the collecting ducts. And that is also logical also, because something this is a diuretic which is trying to remove sodium and water from the body, and AVP or arginine vasopressin, it would try to retain water because it is antidiuretic hormone. So it seems logical that if this particular agent by some mechanism interfere with the action of ADS, then it can can achieve or can lead to more and more water and sodium excretion in the body from the body. So this is another action, that it can blunt ADH mediated water transport in CD cells, because this also by this EP3 receptors present on the collecting ducts and through this PGA2, that reduces the cyclic AMP production. Otherwise this AVP actually acts by increasing the cyclic AMP level in the collecting ducts. It is related to GS protein, act through the G protein coupled receptors. This is a pictorial diagram, diagrammatic representation how loop diuretics act, and this gives you almost everything at one place, how it happens. So this is normally what happens. I am just talking about this has been shown as loop diuretic inhibiting this transport. Forget about this, I am just talking about this. Diagrams tells you the naturally what happens. Okay, this is the thick ascending loop of Henle, right? This is sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transporters. You can see sodium is going inside, potassium is going inside, 2 chloride is going. So if you look at this transporter, this is electrogenically neutral, because if it is 2 negative ions are going inside, 2 positive ions are going inside, so there is no change in the trans epithelial potential or anything. But this sodium potassium is absorbed through this, and because of the basolateral ATPase, sodium potassium ATPase, potassium is getting inside and sodium is going out. So what happens in the cell in comparison to sodium is potassium is getting accumulated more inside. So this is actually secreted through a channel that is called ROMK. This is renal outer medullary potassium channel, right? Different isoforms are there. They are also present in the collecting ducts, collecting tubules, ROMK channel. So what happens, because of the excess potassium inside, this is back diffusion of the potassium in the lumen. So there is excess, and there are divalent cations are also there, calcium and magnesium. So because of this extra positive charge here, this positive repels positives, so these calciums and magnesium actually got absorbed through the paracellular pathway. This is, I'm talking about normal, forget about loop diuretics. If we think about loop diuretic, then everything should get reversed, right? And this chloride is sent through basolateral membrane through a particular channel that is called chloride channel, and so this is the driving force for, because this extra positive charge in the lumen is, you can see this positive charge is being created because of this extra potassium in the lumen. So this, because of this positive potential, this calcium and magnesium is getting absorbed because of this through the paracellular pathway. Fine. But if you use loop diuretic, what will happen? This will not happen. This will not occur. There will be no positive charge in the lumen. So what will happen? This calcium and magnesium will not be absorbed through this pathway, and they will be lost in the urine. That is why I said this can use hypocalcemia and hypomagnesemia. Got my point? So you can see loop diuretic, this thick ascending loop of Henle, it acts here, and enhanced sodium delivery results in potassium loss in the collecting ducts, because this sodium, 25% of the filtered sodium is normally reabsorbed in the loop of Henle. If it is not absorbed through, because of the action of the loop diuretics, this will all actually deliver to the collecting ducts, where there is exchange of sodium to potassium occurs. So body will try to conserve sodium as much as sodium is possible. So sodium will go inside, in exchange of that the potassium has to come out. So more sodium body will try to preserve, more potassium has to be excreted. So this may lead to actually Actually, because of the loop direct action, there is loss of sodium and water. Hypokalemia will happen because there is loss of potassium as well, and that can lead to hypokalemic metabolic alkalosis, right? And there would be increased calcium loss, magnesium loss also. So this is what actually, the picture, overall picture, which gives you entire idea. They see under drug free condition, means this is a diagram for normal, what normally happens in the tubules. Under drug free condition means, don't think about this loop diuretic. Potassium back diffusion creates a positive luminal membrane, Vmax, that is a driving force for divalent cation reabsorptions. That is how it is happening. This channel is ROMK channel, renal outer medullary potassium channel. Fine. Hypokalemic alkalosis, because there is also H plus ion is also there, because that get exchanged to sodium also. So this hydrogen ion loss is also there. So that leads to hypokalemia, as well as this H plus ion also loss is there. So that could be lead to hypokalemic alkalosis, because the acid is being lost. Thiazides or thiazide related diuretics are medium efficacy diuretics, because they act at a site where actually 8 to 10% of the total sodium load that is filtered at glomeruli is handled or reabsorbed. So maximum it can act, it can promote sodium excretion by 8 to 10% only, but loop diuretic up to 25%. So this occurs, this thiazide diuretic acts little distally from the action site of action of the loop diuretics. They actually act in cortical dilutic segments or early DT. I'll show that diagram, that will also make you everything clear. And initially I was just talking that this thiazide diuretics acts on this symport system or co-transport, sodium and chloride co-sample, that is present in the early DT or diluting segment. Why these are called cortical dilutic segment, or this a thick ascending loop is a dilutic segment also. Actually what happens, water can be reabsorbed from the proximal tubule and as well as the thin descending limb of loop of Henle. Why? Because these are actually from their wall is permeable to water, and along with that the reabsorption is occurring of different substances, and along with that obligatory water is also reabsorbed. So the fluid remains isotonic because there is obligatory loss of water. So isotonic fluid, when it is delivered to thick ascending loop of Henle, that is almost impermeable to water, but as this electrolyte reabsorption is occurring, so fluid becomes, the urine becomes dilute, and that whatever is being reabsorbed at the thick ascending loop of Henle, that is very important in creating hypertonic medullary interstitium. That is important because that ultimately help in water preservation by the action of ADH. So this hypertonic interstitium, medullary interstitium, is created by the action of, or thick ascending loop of Henle. So this is also important. And further, in distal convoluted tubule or distal tubules, that is also relatively impermeable to water. So further sodium and chloride reabsorption occurs. So there is further dilution occurs. Now this diluted urine is presented to collecting duct and so prevent the loss of water. Whatever extra water is there, that will be lost. Otherwise this ADH come into play, and that try to prevent this extra water by through action of aquaporins and all that. And that medullary hypertonic medullary interstitium is important. If somehow that is disrupted, then ADH also cannot act. So this is how these areas are called dilutic segments of the kidney. But this particular thiazide diuretics do not affect corticomedullary osmotic gradient. This is corticomedullary osmotic gradient I was talking about, because this create a osmotic gradient from cortex to medulla, that medullary or hypertonic medullary interstitium I was talking about, counter current exchange hairpin mechanism, if you remember in physiology. So this is not affected by this thiazide, because this part of sodium and chloride reabsorption is not important for maintaining this corticomedullary osmotic gradient, rather the thick ascending loop of Henle. So if you use furosemide and all that, this is not created, and this get disrupted. So even the ADH activity will be compromised, because ADH also leads to antidiuretic hormone. So this is area where there is high hypertonicity, so water is through aquaporin is reached here, as well as ADH also increases uric acid retention here, and that also gets accumulated here. So tonicity is further increased. So because of this osmotic drag, the water is through aquaporin channels actually preserved here. But if this is disrupted, this gradient is disrupted, because this is washed out, this is not created, so there will be no gradient, no osmotic gradient. So the more and more water will be lost in the urine. Thiazides have flat DRC. As I told you, they do not have brisk response. They act slowly and they take time, and their response is like this. They are flat. But I was talking about this. They have this kind of response. Loop diuretics. This efficacy is also higher, and dose response curve is steep. And that is why they are more preferred in conditions where you do not want rapid loss of body water and all that. Especially they are not that effective in edema, mobilizing edema fluid. Rather they are important in creating a partial deficit of the body fluid and partial deficit of the body's total body sodium, and they act better as antihypertensives. That is why many of the thiazide diuretics are used as antihypertensive agent, not loop diuretics. These thiazides are not effective in patients with low GFR, as I said, those who have creatinine clearance, because creatinine clearance is after all a surrogate marker for estimating GFR. They are indirectly actually give you information about the GFR. So as I said, that based on previous some studies that have been done, and since then this notion is being carried forward that thiazide are less effective in case of, or not effective in patient with low GFR because of renal failure and all that. So I am also carrying that concept along with me. So they are not effective in patient with low GFR, rather those were active. But however, certain thiazide like diuretic, as I said, metolazone and zipamide, they have some activity in patient with low GFR, also mild to moderate renal failure, metolazone and zipamide. How this flat DRC has been decided, because if you use doses of hydrochlorothiazide, which is very commonly used, hydrochlorothiazide, very commonly used antihypertensive agent or thiazide diuretics. It is usually can be used from doses 12.5 to 100 milligram maximum doses. But if you increase doses more than 100 milligram, the diuretic activity is not going to increase, or any drug so it has flat DRC above which you cannot go. So 100 milligram of hydrochlorothiazide or hydrochlorothiazide equivalent, any other thiazide diuretic which has efficacy equal to 100 milligram of hydrochlorothiazide, that is called hydrochlorothiazide equivalent. So these have flat DRC, so that is why they cannot produce kind of sudden water loss or hypo, kind of a sudden fall in BP and all that. They cannot produce significant hypovolemia and all that. Chlorothiazide is another compound in this group, but as I said, these class of drugs were actually potent drug, but this chlorothiazide require large doses 0.5 to 2 gram. See, 500 milligram to 2 gram. Otherwise, no such drugs have, not more than very small doses are being used. And this is because of its poor lipid solubility. Poor lipid solubility. And for absorption, if a drug has good lipid solubility, that will be absorbed through passive diffusion much more easily through any biological membrane can cross. And it is the only thiazide which is available in the parenteral form. That may be the reason why parenteral form is developed, because the oral bioavailability is unpredictable or cannot be relied upon, because very large doses are required, because so could be that could be the reason. So it is the only thiazide diuretic that is available in the parenteral form. This can also be a question. Chlorthalidone is a very long-acting, thiazide diuretic, which has half-life of almost 50 hours. The reason being, it is very slowly absorbed. So continuous absorption, and it is actually also lasts longer in the circulation also. So that is also one of the reasons it is slowly absorbed, and it has in fact longer-acting action. So it can be used sometimes in every other day, means you can give it leaving one day in between, every other day, means not daily. So this is the advantage because of its high efficacy, this long half-life. And indapamide is unique in the sense that it is excreted primarily by the biliary system. So if it is excreted primarily by the biliary system, then how can it has action in the renal tubule? It can act as antidiuretic, as diuretic, because this indapamide, part of it is also active form of is partly excreted in the urine also, that too in active form. That is sufficient to induce diuretic action. That much fraction is sufficient to induce diuretic action. So despite it's being primarily excreted by biliary system, but some of it is being excreted in the urine, that too active form. So that is sufficient to induce diuretic action. And already cleared this thing that metolazone and zipamide response even in mild to moderate renal failure, which is usually lacking with other kind of thiazide diuretics, and these are called thiazide-like diuretics. They are not exactly like thiazide. There may be some structural changes. So look at the mechanism of action. Forget about this thiazide diuretic. I am just talking about normally what is happening in the this acts in the distal convoluted tubules, that has already been told, cortical dilated segment or early distal tubule. Here we have sodium and chloride co-transporters. Obviously we discussed this is the target of action. So sodium is getting inside, chloride getting inside. This is also a kind of electrically neutral. But sodium potassium ATPase is there, so potassium is coming inside and sodium is going outside. Here there is no this ROMK channel is not there for back diffusion of this thing, and so in fact we have here calcium channel, that is TRPV5. This TRPV5 is the transient receptor potential, transient receptor potential subfamily of vanilloid receptors member 5. These are calcium induced channels, calcium binding channels, you can say. TRPV5, V6, many type of there, many isoforms are there. And here actually calcium is reabsorbed directly. Actually in loop of Henle there was, because of the positive charges, extra positive charge, because of the back diffusion of the potassium in the lumen, and those were all potassium, so calcium and magnesium were getting absorbed through the paracellular pathway. But here the calcium is being absorbed directly, and this is this channel activity and this calcium sodium exchanger, this is also happening. This calcium is getting on the basolateral membrane, is rapidly cleared off from the cells. So this is directly under the parathyroid hormone activity. Parathyroid hormone increases potassium calcium reabsorption, but enhances phosphate excretion. This is very peculiar thing. Rather, and calcitonin increases both calcium and phosphorus excretion. And one another important hormone which is involved in this calcium and phosphorus balance in the body, that is fibroblast growth factor 23, FGF23, that actually also promote phosphate excretion. So this calcium, this parathyroid and FGF23 promote phosphate excretion, but parathyroid enhance calcium reabsorption through this TRPV5, and this is this hormone increases the activity of both this exchanger, calcium sodium exchanger on the basolateral membrane, and also activity here of this calcium induced protein or channels. So these thiazide diuretics do not lead to the deficiency of calcium and all that actually. So they are actually do not cause they are in fact associated with the increased calcium reabsorption, right? Hypokalemic, this the area, this is distal tubule area where they are acting, and enhanced sodium delivery result in the potassium level in the collecting duct, same, because 8 to 10% sodium is given here and body try to preserve most of it. So in exchange of that, potassium has to go out, so that will lead to and hydrogen can also change. So that is why there is also risk of hypokalemic metabolic alkalosis, similar to loop diuretics. There is loss of sodium and water and increased calcium reabsorption, where in case of furosemide there was loss of calcium reabsorption and loss of magnesium and calcium in the urine. So this is patient who are having hypercalciuria, this thiazide diuretics can be used to prevent reabsorb extra calcium, because calcium in high concentration is having less solubility precipitate and can form calcium stones. So that can be used. Thyroid diuretics are used in hypercalciuria, and thus preventing a patient from developing calcium stones. Now come to third group of drugs, that are potassium sparing diuretics. These are, as I said, there are two types of potassium sparing diuretics. One which acts through the receptors, as I said. So they are hormonal receptors. We discussed initially that there is the different mechanism of action of diuretics. So spironolactone and eplerenone, these are the two drugs which actually act through inhibition of mineralocorticoid receptors, androsterone receptors. But these drugs act from the interstitial size. This is an kind of exception. Otherwise, usually diuretics actually secreted in the luminal tubular fluid through this anionic ion transport system or any other ion transport system, and then they act from the luminal side. And these drugs act a little more distally from the site of action of thiazides, that is late distal, that was early distal, and cortical collecting duct system. And these drugs are competitive inhibitor of they compete with aldosterone, which is a natural ligand for this mineralocorticoid receptors, because aldosterone is the most important mineralocorticoid in the body. So they act as the competitive antagonist, receptor antagonist of aldosterone. Actually, by binding to these receptors, because they are steroid receptors, they can induce synthesis of proteins and all that, can affect transcription, all that. So actually, usually when aldosterone binds to this receptor, what happens? Aldosterone leads to induction of a protein called aldosterone induced protein. This aldosterone induced protein is nothing but is ENAC, this epithelial sodium channel, and sodium potassium ATPase, that is basal, which actually maintains the intracellular and extracellular sodium potassium level in control, or maintains the polarity of the cellular membrane. So sodium potassium ATPase. So this aldosterone induced protein not only increases the expression of these proteins, but also leads to translocation of these channels to the apical membrane and this to basolateral membrane, and increase the activity also, their activity, or moreover it also enhances production of ATP from the mitochondria, because here you are requiring ATPs if you want more effect or more work from these pumps, so you need more ATP. So this is ensuring that mitochondria produce enough ATP to sustain or support these activities. But these drugs are mildly cellulitic because the sodium load which is presented at these sites is just 2 to 5% of the total filtered sodium load. So this 2 to 5% sodium load is actually can be excreted by blocking the activity of mineralocorticoid receptor, because here the area where actually aldosterone tightly regulate the total body sodium and all that. But these drugs, that is why they are called weak diuretic. Okay, fine, that is okay. But these weak diuretics can be added to furosemide or thiazide, those who are high efficacy and medium efficacy diuretics. So they can add to their action, they can supplement their action, and but they actually decrease potassium loss. The reason being aldosterone, what aldosterone does in return of the sodium absorbed or reabsorbed, it has to secrete one potassium ion or hydrogen ion. So that leads to sodium preservation but potassium loss. But if you block these receptors, what will happen? This exchange will not occur, so potassium loss will be reduced. So usually with these drugs, more and more sodium is actually delivered at these sites, so body will try to conserve as much as sodium is possible. So the more and more sodium loss is there, so these compound thiazide and furosemide are more prone to cause hypokalemia. And these drugs, by blocking aldosterone action, actually prevent potassium loss and also promoting sodium loss, because aldosterone reabsorbs sodium also. But the loss of sodium is much less in comparison to them, but they can always add. If these two class of drugs are added, this will have a rational fixed drug combination, and this will supplement the diuretic action of these high efficacy or better efficacy diuretics, as well as the side effects induced by these drugs, that is in the term of or in the form of potassium loss or hypokalemia, that will also prevented. So if they are alone used, they can cause hyperkalemia in fact, and alone they are not used at all because they do not have any diuretic action as such. It is very small action, So they add to the natric uretic effect of other diuretics. So they are usually act as adjuvant diuretics. Adjuvant means ones which supplements the action of the primary agent. So these are the primary agent to which these drug can be used. This is the you can see the collecting tubule cells, how this is acting. This aldosterone, it enters from the all drugs were entering through the luminal side, because they are secreted in the lumen. Suppose there is a this anionic transport system, drug is secreted here, and then that actually binds to it's So this aldosterone comes from the basolateral side, interstitial side, and you can see this aldosterone receptor stimulate ENAC expression and sodium potassium ATPase expression. Not only expression, their activity is enhanced, and they translocate these proteins to their side. This is on the basolateral side, and this is on the apical side, apical membrane, and also ensure that more and more ATPs are made available through mitochondria. That the kind of proteins are also being synthesized. Here you can see collecting tubules. These are also ROMK. I told you, you will see here also ROMK. So because of this first of all, see this, because more this sodium is here, high luminal sodium, because 2 to 5% of the sodium load is here. So this and this pump is acting, sodium potassium ATPase. So this whatever sodium gets inside, so this is actually sent outside. So the level of the sodium always remain low in the cell, so that promotes passive diffusion of the sodium along its concentration gradient. You can see this diagram, sodium is higher outside, so this occurs passively. Other than that, the sodium is reabsorbed through this epithelium sodium channel, also called as amiloride sensitive channel also, because amiloride is a drug which can inhibit these channels. So ENAC, the sodium is getting inside. So this sodium going inside, this sodium going inside. So the sodium and potassium is coming from this side, entering from this side. Sodium is good. So in comparison to sodium, potassium is more, so this potassium is recycled to lumen again. So this actually leads to potassium outside, and this leads to kind of a negative generation, because more potassium, the more sodium is absorbed and less of potassium is made available in here. So there is net positive loss from the lumen actually, and that creates a negative potential of around -10 to -50 millivolt. And that is actually because of that negative potential, this chloride is repelled. So this chloride is absorbed through the paracellular pathway. Got my point? So this is normally how chloride is absorbed. This chloride is an anion which is easy to get absorbed. It is the bicarbonate which is actually difficult to get absorbed. Fine. So if you block this aldosterone receptor antagonist, what will happen? This sodium will not be absorbed, that will get lost. Fine. Chloride will also get lost. So more sodium and chloride lost, and this potassium will not come out, so there will be no loss of the potassium. So all these things, you see, loss of sodium and water is there, but hyperkalemia can happen because sodium is not being lost, and some risk of acidosis, because in exchange of sodium actually there is exchange of potassium or hydrogen, and two things are there. So this hydrogen is prevented, that can lead to acidosis kind of thing. So this is also there. Fine. So this is how these drugs act. And in potassium sparing diuretics, there are two groups. One is mineralocorticoid receptor blocker, and these are the renal epithelial sodium channel blockers, ENAC, which is amiloride sensitive channel. So as I said, that net loss of sodium is minor, because they are one of the way of absorbing, because absorption is also occurring through passive diffusion. I showed you that this is one of the way of reabsorbing sodium, but this is happening through this also, passive diffusion along the concentration gradient. So net loss of sodium is minor because maybe reabsorbed, some of it may be reabsorbed. So but indirectly inhibits potassium excretion, because some of the sodium is lost in the urine, so you don't have to exchange it with the potassium, so loss of potassium is also reduced, and decrease in H+ ion secretion as well. As I said, this because potassium is not also exchanged, that and similarly the hydrogen ion will also not be exchanged, because sodium reabsorption is affected. So there is also risk of acidosis with this class of drugs. And block sodium channel from the luminal side, as not like spironolactone or eplerenone, because they were acting through the interstitial side. And nasiritide is a drug which is used in heart failure. This is recombinant form of BNP, that is brain derived natriuretic peptide. This also blunts sodium reabsorption in the collecting tubules. So this can also act here. This may be one of the reason how it actually leads to natriuresis. This is a natriuretic peptide actually, brain derived natriuretic peptide. So natriuretic action may be because of the action in the collecting duct tubules also. In the collecting ducts, we have two kinds of cells, principal cells and intercalated cells. Intercalated cells are A cell or alpha cells and B cell or beta cells. So just remember, A cell, A for acid, so they are involved in secretion of the acid. B cells are involved in the secretion of the bases, in fact bicarbonate in fact, right? So this is principal cells where we have this ENAC, Aramco channel, where actually this aldosterone and all that acting in this principal cell. But this is A type of intercalated cells. Here you can see that on the apical membrane they have hydrogen potassium ATPase and this hydrogen ATPase. This soluble adenyl cyclase, this is act as a sensor of bicarbonate. What is bicarbonate is given received here as a loss. So this actually leads to formation of PK and can activate this hydrogen potassium ATPase. And this also regulate the activity of this A11, that is this is a chloride and bicarbonate exchanger kind of thing. This it is shown as chloride, but this is chloride and bicarbonate exchanger kind of thing. And not only that, it also controls the activity of AE1, that is anion exchanger 1. You can see that bicarbonate chloride is being taken in and bicarbonate is being sent out. This is on the basolateral membrane. There is no difference in the intercalated cells alpha and beta, just this is reversed. This bicarbonate system is on the apical membrane, and this hydrogen potassium this hydrogen ATPase goes on the basolateral membrane. This is the difference, right? So just remember that alpha intercalated cells or intercalated cells is involved in the secretion of hydrogen ion. So you can see this hydrogen potassium ATPase. Where else we have seen this pump, proton pump, hydrogen potassium ATPase in the renal epithelium, this gastric epithelium, and this is just hydrogen ATPase. This leads to 2 hydrogen outside. This is B intercalated cells, beta type intercalated cell. So this is one transporter called pendrin, which actually exchange chloride for bicarbonates. Bicarbonate is secreted, and chloride is taken in. This chloride is again, here sodium is being absorbed. Here sodium absorption continues, but this chloride which came inside, that is going out, and bicarbonate is coming in. So this kind of thing, and in carbonic anhydrase activity is there, that leads to synthesis of this hydrogen ion and bicarbonate. And this bicarbonate, with the help of this anion exchanger 4, is actually along with it is a co-support kind of thing. Bicarbonate, 3 bicarbonate molecule and sodium is getting inside the blood. So this is one thing. And this for absorption of this, actually energy is required this energized by this not sodium potassium ATPase, this HATPase, hydrogen ATPase. This is unique about this beta intercalated cells. I told you this is just reversed. This was here in the case of sodium and bicarbonate pump was here in the alpha cells. See, where is that? It is not shown here. This actually here also, that is there, bicarbonate and chloride, this pump kind of thing, and that is reversed. This hydrogen ATPase is on the basal side, and that is on the oh yeah, this is there. See this, fine. This chloride and bicarbonate is on the and this hydrogen ATPase goes on the basal side, basolateral membrane. So this is the difference. So this is important in secretion of the base. Remember, B for base, and that is A for acid, right? Acetazolamide is also considered as weak diuretic because it actually acts in the proximal tubule. So although the 2/3 of the sodium is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, but what happens when it is delivered to the more distal area like thick ascending loop of Henle or early distal tubule or other areas like in collecting ducts, those area becomes overactive, and they can actually, whatever loss has been induced by the action of the acetazolamide, that is all enhanced reabsorption of that sodium occurs in the distal part of the nephron. So these drugs cannot act as strong agent. Theoretically they should be very potent, means highly efficacious agent, but actually they cannot, because there is reabsorption. Body senses that loss of this thing sodium. So this can always lead to more distal or more effective absorption in the distal part of the nephron. So this actually blocks carbonic anhydrase, which is an important enzyme which leads to formation of H+ ion, and that exchanges with sodium. This I will show you the diagram, and this exchanger NHE3, which actually leads to absorption of sodium and bicarbonate. So this is important. So when you use acetazolamide, this enzyme will be inhibited, and there will be no absorption of the bicarbonate and sodium in proximal tubules. So this will be lost. So what happens actually? This can called mild diuresis because it blocks almost 60-70% of the filtered load of sodium. So even if in the distal part of it is used reabsorbed, so maximum of it will be reabsorbed, so it can lead to maximum 5% of the sodium load excretion. but urine remains alkaline because bicarbonate is inhibited, and bicarbonate is a difficult in anion to be absorbed in comparison to chloride. This is a little difficult to be reabsorbed. So urine has a lot of bicarbonate, so whatever this urine becomes highly alkaline. It can cause alkalinized urine in fact. And secretion of H plus ion is in DT and CD is also interfered with, because H plus ion was synthesized, just you saw in the previous diagram. That is also because of the activity of the carbonic anhydrase. So carbonic anhydrase also is blocked by acetazolamide in the distal tubules and collecting duct also. So H plus ion is not formed. So whatever exchange with sodium will be there with the and here very high load of is being presented. Sodium is being presented in area where potassium exchange is taking. So more and more potassium will be exchanged because hydrogen ion is not being formed because of the inhibition of the carbonic anhydrase. So it will lead to some degree of natriuresis, but highly marked kaliuresis. If you compare it with for the degree of natriuresis, same degree of natriuresis, though they are only causing 5% natriuresis, then the absolute potassium loss will be less. But if you compare with the percentage of the sodium lead, according to that, they are causing they are most potent in causing kaliuresis. If suppose furosemide is causing loss of 25% of potassium loss, sodium loss. If equivalent to this agar potassium loss occurs, then it will be a massive potassium loss. But it does not happen because there is hydrogen ion is also there, that is being exchanged in exchange of sodium. But here hydrogen ion is not synthesized. That is why for this degree of sodium loss, the kaliuresis is significant, potassium loss is significant. And with what happens, this is difficult to be reabsorbed, this potassium bicarbonate ion, so this gets lost and body bicarbonate stores get depleted. So that whatever diuretic effect was there because of this loss of bicarbonate ion, because diuresis, this sodium loss is less, this bicarbonate loss was much. So because of depletion, this bicarbonate ion is not being filtered too much. So the activity of this and because of this acidosis develops. So this bicarbonate is not is required by the body. It is not being filtered so that leads to gradual loss of the diuretic activity of the acetazolamide. That is why acetazolamides have self-limiting diuretic action. They act for sometimes and then the resistance developed. So that is why acetazolamide is not used as a routine. They are used in certain situations like IOP and all that, sudden increase in blood pressure, ocular tension and all that. Fine. This is the example, proximal convoluted tubule. See, because this acts in the proximal convoluted tubule, this is the area convoluted, early part of the tubules, not the straight part. This is the loop of Henle. See, high luminal, because I said almost 2/3 of the sodium is reabsorbed here. So this is along the concentration gradient, it is happening, no problem. This is the NH3 transporter, NHE3, that exchanges hydrogen for sodium. So sodium is getting reabsorbed here with the action of carbonic anhydrase. This carbonic anhydrase convert this H2CO3 which is being synthesized by this. You see this bicarbonate which is got inside, that is broken down by H2CO2 makes bicarbonate carbonic acid, so that is broken down to H plus ion HCO3. This HCO3 is absorbed, and this H plus ion is through this antiporter is again gets attached to the bicarbonate and form H2CO3, which is again broken down. This carbon dioxide can enter inside. Carbon dioxide can cross any biological membrane, right? Water is available everywhere, no problem. So by this way, the sodium and bicarbonates are actually absorbed. Sodium is absorbed here and bicarbonate indirectly absorbed through this pathway. So this is how sodium and bicarbonates are reabsorbed. But when you block this carbonic anhydrase, what will happen? This will lead to loss of sodium and bicarbonate in the body, in the urine. And as said, sodium is reabsorbed in the distal sites, but bicarbonate is difficult to be absorbed because this is the most important site of the bicarbonate reabsorption. And also in the collecting ducts and all that, actually carbonic anhydrase block there also, actually, this carbonic anhydrase. So whatever bicarbonate is to be absorbed, that will also be affected there. So bicarbonate is not absorbed, so urine becomes highly alkaline. And because of this, actually what happens in the distal part of the tubules, proximal tubules, what happens? There is no bicarbonate, right? Usually bicarbonate is reabsorbed. Most 85% of the bicarbonate and sodium bicarbonate is reabsorbed in the early part, and then only sodium remains for absorption and chloride. So what happens? This because of this sodium reabsorption, there is a negative kind of picture is created, and that leads to activation of type of this chloride and base exchanger. This can lead to chloride absorption and sodium absorption is occurring. So sodium chloride, now sodium is absorbed with as sodium chloride, right? So, and this is still the unexplored target against which no drug has been tried. This could be a target which can lead to so chloride is easily absorbed everywhere. Actually, you saw in collecting duct also, because of the negative potential that was getting absorbed through the paracellular pathway. Here it is directly transcellular pathway because of this transporter. But bicarbonate is little difficult to reabsorb. That is why this carbonic anhydrase inhibitor can lead to significant loss of bicarbonate in the urine, and that is why highly alkalinized urine is produced. And metabolic acidosis can occur because hypokalemia is happening, that is there, and there is loss of bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and tolerance develops after 2 to 3 days because acidosis develops, and there is no filtration of the bicarbonate, and that leads to self limiting diuretic activity of the acetazolamide, because this bicarbonate in the urine was taking the water along with it more. So very important. Mannitol is an osmotically active agent, or any osmotically active agent that is filtered at glomeruli and but is not reabsorbed, can lead to water loss, and this occurs usually in as I said, proximal tubule and thin descending loop of Henle. Thin descending loop of Henle, because those are water permeable, and that is all the absorption, water absorption here is because of because many electrolytes are being reabsorbed, along with that water obligatory water reabsorption was occurring. But because of this osmotically active mannitol, because it remains in the lumen, it is not being reabsorbed or handled by the kidney. So because of it induces a tonic force or osmotic pressure kind of thing. So that pressure keeps those water does not allow water to go across the membrane. So it remains there in the so major action is in the proximal tubule and thin descending loop of Henle. So this has a very high efficacy. It can lead to very prominent water diuresis, but and natriuresis also happens, but natriuresis is always in comparison to water diuresis is less than the natriuresis, because hypotonic fluid will be lost. So if more water diuresis is occurring and less natriuresis is occurring, what will happen? There is chances of hypernatremia in the body, and it can, though it is used for water diuresis, but it can lead to 20% loss of sodium, in fact, because 65% of the sodium is reabsorbed in the primary proximal tubule. So I will tell you how it is possible. Possible to lead to sodium loss, because it does not affect sodium reabsorption at all by no means, but I will tell you how it can lead to sodium loss as well. And it also opposes the action of ADH in the collecting duct, because of increased tonicity and all that, it can the water from the collecting duct is removed and retained in the body through that medullary hypertonic medullary interstitium, and because of the osmotic gradient between collecting duct and that medullary interstitium, hypertonic medullary interstitium. But because in collecting duct, because of this mannitol and all that, high tonicity is there. So how can this water go there? No, it will not. So this can lead to blunting of the action of the ADH hormone also in the. So it leads to ultimately high urine flow and water loss along with natriuresis. So it can be used in conditions when there is avid sodium retention occurring with the conventional diuretics, and thus diuretic response is interfered with. This is a type of diuretic resistance, because chronic use of diuretics can activate RAS system, and there will be evident sodium retention by the body. So in such cases, to assist the activity of the other diuretics, this mannitol can be used. And as I said, this mannitol can increase the urine flow, too much urine flow, so that it can flush off the kidney of the large pigment load that can occur because of the rhabdomyolysis or rapid massive hemolysis intravascularly, so that these pigment can actually block renal tubules and can produce acute renal failure or complete anuria. So to avoid this, it is ensured that high urine flow is maintained, and that can happen, can be achieved with mannitol, right? So it is because it leads to loss of body water. It can be used to reduce ICT because of osmotonicity, because in the blood also it is given IV. So in the blood blood is hypertonicity, so it will draw intracellular fluid. So from the within the cell, blood fluid will come into the blood compartment. So this will lead to shrinkage of the cell. So that will be advantageous in case of ICT, intracranial retention. So the brain volume will decrease and all that. IOP, and also increased renal flow may promote any renal toxin that have been accumulated. So with increased flow, that will be flushed out. So in these situations, these are used. But this mannitol cannot be used or even contraindicated in acute renal failure, because kidney does not produce urine even if this osmotic compound like mannitol is given. So if already ARF has set in, mannitol is even contraindicated. You should not use before development of ARF. You should try this, so that you can ensure high increase or high urine flow. Some of the oliguric patients usually do not respond to mannitol, this tonic, hypertonic or osmotically active diuretics. So usually one should try giving a test dose of 12.5 milligram of mannitol IV before continuing the infusion of the mannitol, and a test dose after giving the test dose over the 3-hour period. The urine flow should increase to more than 50 ml per hour at least. Then only you should continue with further doses of mannitol, that is every 1 to 2 hours you keep giving 12.5 to 25 gram IV. Usually the dose of mannitol is 200 ml of 20% solution over 20 minutes. If you have to use it in emergency condition like to reduce ICT and IOP, etc. So this is the usual dose, and this is in case of usually or roughly one can require 1 gram per kg body weight. That should be the aim. So this can be infused over 20 minutes. So this is how mannitol acts. This is I was telling how it can, though it is intended to be used to reduce total body water, to reduce the or induce volume depletion, but this can lead to sodium loss as well. See, this is acting in the proximal tubule. This is the area proximal tubule. Here actually maximum I said proximal tubules, and this is the area, this thin descending loop of Henle. These are the area which are water permeable. So it is not allowing water to lose water. So this water remains inside the remain in the lumen. See, this is not allowing water to go out, just inhibiting water. This is all dots are mannitol. So not allowing water to go out, not allowing water to go out. So same is happening here, not allowing water to go out. But delivered load of sodium, because of H2 failed to get recaptured. So whatever because urine flow is so high that in proximal tubules and all this area, the sodium is not reabsorbed, because it has got less time to get in contact with these reabsorption area. So almost 20% of the filtered load of the sodium is lost. So high flow actually rate diminishes sodium reabsorption. So marked reduction in sodium as well as H2O reabsorption. So there is no direct interference with the sodium reabsorption, but it is because of the contact time is reduced because of the high urine flow. So that is leading natriuresis also. But this drug is not meant for natriuresis, but this will occur. This is called obligatory water loss, tonicity. Because so this is how mannitol acts. So this is end of the topic, and next day we'll try, in the next part we'll discuss how what are the clinical uses of diuretics as well as their adverse effects, and we'll talk about antidiuretics as well as those ADH antagonist and all. So this is all about the today's lesson, and I would again would try to recapitulate, or you will try to remind you that you use this Telegram app, where you can join to this group to receive information about daily classes. The educators keep posting their all scheduled classes, scheduled topic and timings, etc. on this group. So you can also be part of this group, but you can receive messages, you cannot send messages. That is not a problem, because you always need information about the classes that will be available. So you need that much only, and that is that will suffice your purpose. And you are attending these classes just now. What I am saying is but you are not capable of interacting with me on YouTube, NEET PG channel on Unacademy NEET PG channel on YouTube. So there is another platform which is in the form of Unacademy Learning App, where you can attend special classes that are also free of cost. But here you have a different kind of experience, because this interface is really good, and you have opportunity to interact with educators. So if you have not downloaded it, just do it right now, and enjoy these free special classes as well. But for the students who actually are not satisfied with this free content and want something extra in the form of maybe the guidance and the strategy how to tackle these exams, or other course materials, or this series, test series, etc. For them, there is paid service available in the form of NEET PG Plus, and one can join that NEET PG Plus, but that is subscription based. As I said, you need to pay something for that, though most of the content at Unacademy are aired free of cost, and entire population or entire beneficiary can watch these sessions, attend these sessions for absolutely free. But on Plus, you have other services, in fact, that actually makes it more lucrative, and also more useful for those PG aspirants who want to improve their chances of or probability of clearing PG entrance examination. And this platform is for those people, and they can always subscribe to it and can make full advantage or take full advantage of it. So subscription is available for 12 months and 24 months, and that too as a reasonable cost. The cost is not too much, I suppose, and after applying this 10% discount, once you use my referral code Dr. Pramod, This roughly comes to 20,000 for 1 year and 25,000 for 2 years subscription. That is, I don't think it's a reasonable amount, and anybody or most of the people can afford it probably. And 12 months, if you have decided to go for 12 months, that is fine, because the syllabus is too lengthy, and in 12 months period actually you come to know about or you will be exposed to many educators, many courses, all that is if important to make you or make you ready for the entrance examination in a much better way than so you will get other kind of guidances, and also the the courses that are being posted on this NEET PG Plus are as per your need, as per the entrance examination, which particular entrance examination, as per the different entrance examination based. So this is a customized kind of thing, meeting all the needs of the subscribers for the different PG entrance examination. So you can, whenever you feel like, you can always join this NEET PG Plus by paying the amount which has been mentioned. So if you really liked my class and would like to come on the Plus platform, you are welcome, but don't forget to use this referral code that will avail you 10% direct discount. And with this, I think the class is over, and but these advantages would definitely attract you towards this NEET PG Plus platform, because there is real-time interaction. Really, you have opportunity to interact with the educator quite frequently. You can interrupt any time in between the class. That is a plus point, because unless until there is a communication between the learner and educator, the learning process is not that efficient, which I think is the essence of the any learning experience. And there are facilities of live post leaderboard that is beneficial for you, for us also. You can take many test series analysis, and also the live doubt clearing session is there. Means you are always poked to ask queries, raise your doubts and clear your concepts and everything. So this is one subscription, one stop solution for all your needs. So I would suggest that you should come to this platform, though it is paid basis, but I told you this can enhance your probability or chances of clearing the NEET or any PG entrance examination. So that is always in your favor, that is in your interest. So thanks for attending this NEET PG Live Daily, and those who have not subscribed to it, I would suggest that you subscribe to it, and don't forget to click this bell icon, because this will give you all the notifications in it. And if you have really liked my lecture, give a thumbs up, and share this. Those who do not know about this, you can share this link with your friends. They can watch this lecture and all, and spread this information as much as possible, because this is all free. So let people take advantage of free service. This is always good for us also, because more and more people use, and that too free. So one should use these free services as much as possible. So with that, I would take your leave, and would thank you for attending this session. For the time being, this is good night for you, and bye bye.